Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ila, your host for today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure welcoming you all to live webinar on the theme of Making Hybrid Cloud Real, Building for Scale. This webinar is hosted by Cyber Media Research in association with VMware. For the duration of presentation, all participants' lines will be in listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Your feedback is very important for us. Please submit your feedback at the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Pankaj Mishra, Assistant Vice President, IT, Reliance Capital, who will share his insights on towards a successful hybrid cloud journey. Pankaj, over to you.
Thanks, Ila. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start this discussion with the very familiar term virtualization journey, without which I don't think so we could connect to this hybrid cloud journey at all. So when we talk about this virtualization journey, let me take you guys a decade before when we talk about moving from the physical setup, physical infrastructure, the hardware to the virtualization layer. Everyone from the customer end was talking about whether we should go, whether we should not. But now when we talk about that entire question, whether we should go is not at all relevant in environment. Now the questions are which workload we have to move to that. And there is no two ways to think about this, that virtualization is a part and parcel in our entire data center infrastructure layer. So when we talk about cloud journey, we have to also understand when we discussed a few years back a private cloud, public cloud, and now the term is hybrid cloud. Earlier, the discussion and the roadmap which we are talking about, that was purely a roadmap which we are focusing as a customer for our environment. But now every customer environment is based on outcome-focused roadmap. When we talk about moving towards the journey to the hybrid cloud, let us see what different researchers and people are talking about this hybrid cloud journey. When we have gone back to the data which people are talking about regarding the hybrid cloud, approximately 75% of the organizations which by 2020 they are thinking that will be on hybrid cloud deployment. That hybrid cloud or a multi-cloud, right now when we talk about these kind of clouds, earlier the stage was whether the data is secure, whether the guidelines, whatever the regulatories we are following as a customer is allowing us to go to the cloud or no. But now, when we talk about these kind of a journey, this is, I think, a part and parcel of the planning. Now that question is ruled out whether the sensitive data is going out is secure or no. Obviously, in the subsequent slide, when the people who are providing this cloud, or when we talk about the multi-cloud environment, they make sure that the data which we are talking about moving it to the public cloud or making the hybrid cloud to our environment using public and private both at the same time is far more secure than what we were thinking maybe 5 years or 6 years back. At the same time, when we see the data, the TCO calculation, when we talk about cost reduction approach, normally when we talk to any of the CTOs, CIOs, the first question comes to their mind whether this will reduce my cost of ownership or no. Now I think the approach has changed little bit. That is my personal perspective as a customer. The approach has changed, the perspective has changed from cost or resource reduction to cost or resource optimization. That is why when we talk about this, we have to think how we can optimally use our data center and keeping the lights on and giving 24/7, 365 days the business requirement. At the same time, When we go back to this researchers, the BFSI segment is a niche segment where people are more reluctant to talk about going into the public cloud. So the first question, why hybrid cloud? Let us think about the scenario where we talk about a shadow IT, where businesses had made it very easy going into the different IT segments and which resulting into the security risk and all those things. Now there are cost pressure keeping the lights on, and the cost pressure is more on reducing those hardware peripheral devices cost effectiveness, and the more cost is going towards the innovation. When we talk about these kind of innovation, that automatically gives us the roadmap where our applications, which are a cloud-based applications, where applications which demand a very huge scale, the applications like analytics, the applications which we are talking about, which is going to scale maybe in multifold, which will be difficult for us to manage on-prem. That gives the first thought, can we deliver it through cloud? And when we think about this, yes, the first thought process comes into the picture that let us explore public cloud. This is purely a thought process from the customer end. When we see this public cloud, lot of times we see a compliance and the data protection strategy guidelines from most of our InfoSec departments or our CISOs that whether these are secure. Yes, no, maybe. Then we have to go back to again a lot of cloud providers. Right now in India, mostly we are working with almost all. So that particular time, the thought process remains same. When we have to go for this journey, the journey should be successful, because not only we are starting a journey, we want a result which has been demanded by our business. At the same time, when the data which we are talking about, which we are thinking about moving it to public cloud, that is again a question from the security risk perspective, whether those data are now secure or no. Earlier, the problem and the guidelines which we are in BFSI segments are thinking of, the data should not go beyond the country boundaries. Now that situation is also not there. So why not to think about cloud? And when we are thinking about cloud, yes, BFSI segment will restrict few of their production and critical data to the private cloud. That is why now it's a time when we should think about moving it to the hybrid cloud. At the same time, when we are thinking and when we are evaluating this kind of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud approach, we should also think about what all benefits we are getting. And yes, every new technology and innovation when we are talking about will have some or the other pitfalls as well. We will discuss about that. But let me give you few benefits which we as an customer see what all things we can gain from actually adopting a hybrid cloud. When we want to move it, our scale on demand capacity, there are a lot of questions comes into this. When we go back to our procurement cycle, when we go back to our application team, to the business team, taking all those pains, and again, we are not actually delivering on time what business demands. Can we do it in much faster way? Now the answer might be yes. Why I am saying might be yes? Because every customer environment we all know is different. But the driver to the customer environment is almost same. I'll say not almost, it's 100% same. The revenue generation, going into the market and giving the business the agility what they want. When we talk about BFSI segment, the very important aspect, which data should go to public. That criteria is the utmost when we think about these kind of scenario. There are few use cases which I will be discussing, which we thought let us go to use and evaluate public cloud. And at the end, when we talk about this, yes, there are a couple of major use cases when we think about our test and dev environment. In India, do we have in-house or maybe use cases where the team is building applications, whether those teams need this virtual machines, this environment, whether it's test and dev, pre-production or whatever for the quality purpose 24/7? Answer might be yes, no, maybe in few organizations. But a lot of cases, we have done internally assessment that a lot of cases in our environment, we use this data for maybe 12 hours to 18 hours. Then why to incur the cost 24/7, 365 days if the option is available to keep this data available as and when required for our developers or for the users? At the same time, when we are talking about scaling up these demands whenever it's needed for any testing purposes, any quality assurance, these kind of a data sometimes requires a rigorous UAT, and that environment requires a huge amount of compute power processing. Can we do it on-prem? Answer is yes, but on what cost? That needs to be evaluated thoroughly. Now there are a lot of technology partners like VMware they can come into the picture and they can give that assessment that whether our applications are cloud ready or not, whether we can move it to public cloud or whether we should keep it to private one. At the same time, when we talk about the benefits, it's a lot of use cases about the compliance and the guidelines which we are adhering when we talk about the DR readiness. Right now, most of the cases, there are a couple of businesses, which runs the data center as active, but yes, there are certain customer environments where people are running their data center active, passive, and these data centers are used not operationally 365 days, yes, but as a disaster recovery site. So can that passive site should go to public? That's again taking questions to each and every organization nowadays. When we think about these kind of use cases, the benefits of hybrid cloud itself gives you the thought, why can't we explore that? As a customer, I think, yes, this is the time when we can think about these kind of use cases. There are some prerequisites to actually start this journey. And I'm categorically talking about starting this journey, not the successful journey, because if we are lacking on prerequisite, the success and that success ratio may differ. So when we talk about moving it to the public cloud, we have to be very careful choosing what type of a data because of our niche vertical and the sensitive data which we are keeping with us. When we talk about load balancing, the same performance, like the setup, there might be, I think, 100 plus customers which we were discussing internally in our customer forum, that whether we should also think about developing a pre-production environment, which exactly like a production environment, but needs a performance to simulate the actual performance load in live scenario when we go to the market. So when we start this entire journey, I think we have to first see whether our private cloud journey is rock solid or successful. Then I think we should think about hybrid cloud. There are, I have discussed about all good things, but yeah, there are a couple of challenges which, as a customer, I can see. Number one, and the most priority which I can think of for the BFSI segment as well as the segment which are keeping the data which are more sensitive type of data. The question to all of us that whether we should move it, whether the technology which service providers, the cloud service providers are giving it to us is robust enough to keep the data. I'm sure next session of Amol will give that answer as well. The second important aspect or the challenge is when we think about moving it to the hybrid cloud, what compliance and the guidelines which we are adhering will actually be the roadblock. I feel there are a lot of laps and the understanding gap in our environment. I'm talking about a customer environment. We have to take a concurrence from the service provider as well, plus the guideline from the compliance team, that what actually we are following and what guidelines is asking us not to go for public cloud environment. In most of the customer places, what we see that we are adhering to some guideline, but yeah, we are not having the enough understanding about that guideline. At the same time, the challenge is also regarding how to prevent the data leakage. Whether our public cloud providers are having that robust system. There are a couple of instances when customer also see the data is currently in my data center. It is my own data center and I know how to manage the data center. But when we talk about preventing that downtime, whether the public cloud providers are currently giving that resiliency and availability, that again a thought we have to see. And the basic and the very important aspect, can I go ahead and re-architect the entire on-prem legacy applications to the cloud ready? And how to manage that? These are a couple of challenges which, as a customer, I see that almost every customer will think through. To actually go as a success factor of this entire journey, I think the very important aspect is to change in the mindset. If we are into that mindset that yes, we are going ahead with the cloud journey, the important aspect is planning. We have to define these milestones, and we should, as a customer, we should not go all in one. I think we have to go step by step, and we have to actually see this, that how we can actually manage our private and public cloud from a single pane of glass when it comes to the management and the governance. The success factor also talk about when we actually deploy our private cloud in that scenario where we are actually into the next stage of moving it to the public cloud and making the hybrid cloud real. There are a couple of use cases which I have already discussed. What I can see, these use cases are different for different organizations, for different domain users, different verticals. But yes, when we talk about migrating test and dev environment, keeping the lights for test and dev environment 24/7, 365 days, keeping your DR setup idle as an active passive DR setup. When we talk about the data which are currently lying and which are actually for the archival, there is very less chance of taking the data back, or maybe the retrieval cycle is very less. These are the couple of use cases as a customer I can see where we can think of moving this data from my private cloud to the public cloud. And I'm sure most of us will agree to this statement that once I will have that clarity, the planning which we are talking about, it would not be a difficult journey. And then I think it is easy for all of us to actually utilize this innovative thought which most of the public cloud providers are talking about. Let us use multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. So I will be closing my discussion with again one thought. Let's change our perspective from cost or resource reduction approach to cost or resource optimization approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra, for setting up the platform for today's webinar. Now it's my pleasure to introduce your next speaker, Amol P. Divanji, VMware, and he will share his insights on the PPT. Over to you, Mr. Divanji.
Thank you, Prerna. Thank you, Pankaj, for wonderful insights. So my name is Amol Divanji, and I head the systems engineering practice for BFSI vertical at VMware. So let me start, giving you a bit of a perspective from what I have learned so far. So I've been in industry for almost 20 years, right? And in year 2012, when I was with a different company, I interacted a lot with system integrators, the large system integrators, right? And that time I was talking to somebody who was architecting solutions for European region. And, that time we were discussing about cloud. And of course, like always, the early adopters in any technology is always, North America region. And, in APAC, it is usually Australia, right? And at that point also, Australia as well as North America were leading in terms of cloud adoption. And this I'm saying more from public cloud adoption perspective, right? So that was the, scenario then. Last week, again, I was with the same large system integrator. I was again discussing something with a solution architect who architects solutions for very, very large banks in US. And he was saying now the perspective has changed, right? So people have moved or started utilizing cloud in Americas or Australia long back, but now they've realized that that is not it. What is required is a combination of private cloud and public cloud services, right? So, it's kind of, I would say, homecoming for most of the organizations outside India, right? So there is a bit of learning here, right? And I think so, it gives and tells us a lot, right? That, obviously, I mean, no solution fits everybody, and everybody should decide based on what their business outcomes or what their business demands. But usually the, trend has been like this. So my idea behind telling you the story was that, people have experimented with public cloud. Now they do want to come back, at least for some workloads which don't make sense on public cloud. So people have found a middle path. That is, a combination of private and public cloud services, right? So what is driving these adoptions, right? Why do people are even considering public cloud services, right? If you see, the major driver has been applications, right? I can tell you from my experience, and sorry if I'm clear in terms of my examples being from banking domain because I come from that domain, right? So I can tell you in Indian banking scenarios, some of the, one of the banks, incidentally, started off with 175 applications, almost like somewhere around, 3-4 years back, right? Now today that bank has more than 800 applications. In any decent-sized bank I go today, you will most likely see almost from 250 odd to 400 odd applications, right? So, the basic thing is that in next coming years, you will see loads of applications getting onboarded, right? So that has been the biggest driver, right? And obviously applications like advanced analytics, next generation storefronts, these are typically your online storefronts which keep on getting better and better, right? Real-time analytics. People want real-time analytics as to what the consumer is doing and roll out offers. So there are, tons of applications around it. People are looking to improve the self-service experiences, right? So there are a lot of applications which are getting onboarded into data center. Obviously, you need to find space and resources to run it. So that's what is driving this adoption or expansion of, cloud beyond what is existing on your premises, right? And of course, I heard Pankaj mentioning about shadow IT, and this is so much prevalent. And contrary to popular thinking that probably BFSI or banking vertical is where there are more tighter control. But even today, when I go and speak to the IT department, I do find that they are also struggling with shadow IT. There are businesses who obviously care about revenue generation, who care about customer satisfaction, who care about process improvements, and if they do find an application which matches these needs, they will go and ask IT department, okay, I need to deploy this. How soon can you deploy? And if the answer is 5, 6, or 7 months, it is very likely that business owner goes and deploys it on the cloud because I can go and start using it from next day onwards, right? So that's agility which public cloud gives. But when you do that, you are actually creating a shadow IT which is actually kind of not so much desired, because now you're having multiple silos, you're having different points of controls, and a possible security scenarios, right, which you don't want. So what is the other flexibility which a business application is looking at, right? So imagine, for example, you are in process of onboarding an application and you have gone through the development process, you want to do testing. Now, would you want to do testing in an environment which is unlike the production scenario? Obviously not, right? So you would like parity in terms of environments, right? And you go to any enterprise organization, and I'm assuming there are a lot of you who are attending this session are from large enterprises where you have a established EA practice. The number one rule is maintain parity across environments, right? Be it test, dev, SIT, UAT, you need to have parity across environments so that you have minimal issues when you go to production, right? So that's another very, very important factor, right? While you do that, your business application still requires that flexibility to be deployed. At this point, I would just like to hold on and ask, Cyber Media to put on the poll question which we have come up with.
So our poll is, which public cloud provider do you work with? The options are AWS, Azure, IBM, VMware, cloud service providers, NetMagic, Cephe, NextGen.
Okay, so I will move ahead with the presentation. So what are the key requirements and challenges for adopting a hybrid cloud? So obviously, on the private cloud front, you are most likely to have a VMware-like solution or a Hyper-V solution or a KVM solution, right? Which means the virtual machine format is something like a VMDK, right? Whereas if you take into consideration any cloud service, a public cloud service, say for example like an AWS, it has a totally different machine format, which is an AMI, right? So two very, very different formats. What about networking, right? So for example, AWS works on L3 networking, whereas on private side of thing, if it is a VMware of course stands L3, but it also does logical L2 networking, right? On On the operational consistency, for example, on your on-premise data center, you may be used to use certain tooling. You may be using, if you're a VMware customer, you may be using things like vRealize automation to, templatize and deploy your VMs faster, right? On the native public cloud services, it would be a totally different tool, right? You would have created runbooks for your private data center, right? And when you move to public cloud services, you'll have to create a completely different runbook, right? Skill sets, that's another issue, right? Most of your admins who are working inside the data center are used to a certain environment. So, for example, VMware admin is less likely to understand AWS construct and vice versa, right? So these are typical issues which you will come up with when you are moving the hybrid journey way, right? So how do we solve this? So what interestingly VMware went and did about a year and a half back was they went ahead and partnered with AWS, right? So it's basically a marriage of the largest private cloud provider with the largest public cloud provider, right? So that's what exactly we did, and basically we leveraged each other's strengths. Needless to say that there is tons of engineering work which has gone behind to make the service, customized specifically for a hybrid cloud journey. So, if you recall, I gave you a perspective of what problems would you, most likely be having when you move to a hybrid kind of scenario, right? Now, with this specific service, which is, VMware Cloud on AWS, how do we solve these issues, right? So, basically, this service is exactly what you do today in your private cloud scenario. So, if you are a VMware customer, you are used to certain tooling, certain skill sets, certain way of doing things. This is exactly same thing which we have, basically packaged and running it as a service on AWS infrastructure, right? So it has absolutely consistent technologies on both the sides, on your private side as well as on the public side where the service is running, right? It is portable, right? So that's the basis, and this is I think, the most important point in this entire presentation. Today, if you want to move to a public cloud service, right, remember I told you there is differences between the machine formats, there's a difference between the way you do networking, right? So there's a lot of things which are different. So how do you move, right? There is a lot of services which are required to, actually pick this workloads from your private data center and move it to the public cloud service, because you virtually have to change everything, right? You have to rip and replace your formats, you have to rip and replace the way you're doing your networking and things like that, right? So it's not easy, right? So there is a lot of migration effort required. But with this service, it is just as easy as dragging and dropping. So if you are a BMW or a VMware customer, and if you know about vMotion, right, this is exactly like vMotioning to the cloud. It is as simple as, picking that workload and putting it into the cloud. No refactoring required, nothing is required, right? Because the technology stacks at both the ends are exactly similar, right? So there is a parity in environment. You don't require to do anything. And the best thing is that it's integrated with all the native AWS services, right? So if you wish to consume any native AWS service, it's up for you. And like I said, we don't care what application you're running, as long as, it's running on BMW environment or VMware environment on-premise, you are just, free to, pick it up and run it on the cloud. So be it, container workload or, a microservices-based workload, or be it a traditional VM, right, you can just move them to the cloud in a jiffy. So let me get down to the brass tacks as to what this service is really made up of. Right? So this service is typically constructed using the same components what you would have used in your private cloud environment on-premise. So what do you use when you deploy a VMware service on-premise, or when you've created a private cloud? You would use a hypervisor, which is vSphere. You would use a vCenter to manage and monitor it, right? You would use VROps, or a dashboard which will monitor the entire scenario, right? You would use some sort of storage, like for example a SAN or a NAS, right? And you would use networking, right? So these are basically the elements which you would use in your private data center. So on this service, which is VMware Cloud on AWS, we exactly use the same technology stack. So we use the same old hypervisor, which is vSphere. We use the virtualized storage engine here, which we call as vSAN, right? And we use the software-defined networking stack from VMware, which is NSX, right? And this gives us a lot of flexibility, right? While I'm saying that the service used NSX on AWS, please remember it is not compulsory to have NSX configured on the private side of things. So it doesn't matter if you have NSX on your private data center or not. It doesn't matter, right? It's not a prerequisite. So what is this? So how is this constructed, right? So these are three basic elements. Now, what you get with this service is basically unlike a traditional public cloud, where usually you consume by number of VMs, right? So when you subscribe to any public cloud services, basically what you consume is a VM. Unlike that, here in this service, what you will do is you will start consuming nodes. So point number one, there is no limit to number of VMs you can create on node. So we don't do or we don't sell this service by the number of VMs. So we sell this by the number of nodes. So bare minimum, you need to have 3 nodes configured in a cluster for you to be able to start consuming this service. Now, you would ask me, okay, it's 3 nodes, so what if one of the nodes fails, right? So if one of the nodes fails, I give you the 4th one, or the HA comes bundled in. You need not worry about the HA at all. So all the 3 nodes which you have subscribed for are available for you to utilize to the fullest. We don't stop you. Like I said, you can oversubscribe crazily, right? So you can go almost, you can go ahead and, have consolidation ratio of 1:15, 1:30, you don't care, right? As it is not built by the number of VMs. So what is the hardware construct, beneath this? So what we give is an Amazon i3 service or servers, basically, which comes with 36 cores, which has half a terabyte of RAM. It has about 3.5 terabytes of NVMe cache, and it has about 10.2 terabytes of NVMe raw storage. So that's what you get per node, and you get 3 such minimum nodes, right? And how do we connect these nodes? We connect these nodes via a low latency, high bandwidth interconnect, which is 25 Gbps. And of course, since this is in cloud and we do care about the data, encryption comes built in. So whatever data you put by default is all encrypted, right? And services like deduplication also comes bundled in. Now, how do you really connect from your data center to the service? The answer is again pretty simple. What you need to do is you need to create a L2 tunnel, VPN tunnel from your private data center to this service. Or you can connect via AWS Direct Connect. If you are already an Amazon customer and you have a Direct Connect facility at your data center, you can utilize that as well. So basically, when you establish the connection, what you actually do is you first of all, basically link the vCenter, right? So vCenter is the heart of management for your on-premise private cloud, right? So what you do is take that vCenter and basically link it with this service. So this service will also have a vCenter. Basically, you link this vCenter to the vCenter which is running on this service, and you basically create a single pane of glass. Right? So that's what you do when you want to start consuming this service. Now, unlike on your private side of things, the vCenter or the management plane on this service is entirely managed by VMware, right? While the private side of things, you still continue to manage and control that environment, but the service which is hosted inside AWS, the management plane is completely controlled and managed by VMware. That means that we will do upgrades for you, we will do patching for you, we'll do the complete lifecycle management for you. Right? And the third thing is, how do I connect to the native AWS services? So you remember I told you the networking construct between VMware and AWS is different, right? So we have figured out the way we have jointly engineered a solution which lets you interface this service with the native AWS service. Right. So again, a high bandwidth, low latency network which connects this service to the native AWS services like Lambda, or be it RDS, DynamoDB, or Elastic File Services, or Elastic Load Balancing, or if you want IP services. Everything can be consumed from the native side of things of AWS. So let me move and dig a little bit deeper into how this will actually work. So like I said, this basically has three components. It has the hypervisor, which is vSphere. It has vSAN and NSX. And I'm sure the audience listening to this should be fairly conversant with vSphere or vSAN side of things, right? So let me just try to give you a perspective from how is NSX really going to help you out with this service, right? So imagine that you have created a L2SEC VPN tunnel and it's connected to this service. Now, once you've connected to the service, obviously you will start consuming this or by connecting this via the gateways. Right? So you will have basically two kinds of gateways which you will create. The first gateway would be the management gateway, which will give you access to your vCenter. Right? While we control the patching and upgrades, you still have an access to vCenter to provision the VMs. Right? So that still remains with you. The other gateway is to connect to your workloads. Right? Now NSX does a lot of powerful things. It does things like microsegmentation. It does things like distributed firewalls, right? Which means that you are essentially bringing in tons of security inside the service, right? So you can set things like for example, if you want to block an access to a particular VM, right? You can set those kind of firewall rules. For example, you want to set rules for production, test, or development kind of environments. You can do that. Or, for example, you want to set rules for your applications, like, say, for example, web can't access, application tier, or application can't access web tier or database tier. So you can do all those kind of firewalling inside this particular service, right? And like I said, NSX, again, is not mandatory on the private cloud side of things. So even if you don't have NSX on your private cloud, it's still good to go. Doesn't matter, right? All you require is to just download a NSX Edge on your private data center, which obviously we don't charge for, right? So it's an Edge. It comes bundled with the service. You establish the connection with this service, and you are free to use NSX and advanced functionality of NSX like microsegmentation and distributed firewalls, right? So now, the next question is, obviously, now this is a cloud, right? So I should be able to scale up, scale down based on my requirements. And, right, can do exactly that. How do you do that, right? So imagine you have a 3-node cluster. Now, this 3-node cluster hits utilization of, say, for example, 80%. And you configure a rule saying that if it hits the utilization of 70 or 80%, I'll provision another node. So, one more node gets provisioned automatically based on the utilization of these 3 nodes in a cluster, right? So as soon as it hits 70 or 80% or whatever threshold you define, the 4th node would come online and start servicing the workloads, right? And what if, that workload or that peak goes down, right? We can also take it up, right? So you can configure all this automatically to work automatically, right? What else can you do, right? Like I said, this is keeping in mind operational consistency. So how do you achieve that? You are a VMware customer, you use tools like VRA for automation, for provisioning, right? You use the same tool to even do provisioning on this service as well, right? So VRA on-premise can be used to discover, manage, govern this entire construct which exists on the AWS cloud, right? And the best thing is you can also utilize your existing licensing setup, right? There is no extra licenses required if you have enough already on-premise purchased by your procurement, right? So you can utilize those. How do you monitor it, right? So same VROps which you use on-premise can also be used to monitor, create dashboards, create various views for you inside the service, right? So everything remains same for you essentially. Now, the other thing is, okay, I am interested in the service and I wish to basically migrate, say for example, my development and my test environment to this service on AWS. How do I do that? Now that environment, those environments are big environments. How do I move it, right? So we have solved this problem with something which we call as VMware HCX. Now what does HCX do? It basically does vMotion of the workloads which you choose from on-premise to the service. Right? And when I say vMotion, I'm not kidding. It actually does vMotioning across these environments from your private to AWS cloud online, right? In fact, I'm not sure how many of you were there in the last VMworld. VMworld, is our largest and marquee event where actually our CEO on stage, actually before this to a large crowd. He actually evacuated a complete data center and moved it to the service on AWS, right? Just on a click of a button. So HCX actually allows you to do this, right? And what about the dependencies? So these are typical questions, right? Any VMware admin would have. Okay, I have VMware 5.5 in my data center, or I have 6.0. What version are you running on this service? So obviously on this service, I'm running the latest and the greatest, which is the most stable, right? Remember, I am managing it, not you, right? So I'm taking care of all the management, right? So I'm ensuring it is the most stable and the most latest one. But on-premise, I am running older versions. So how do I move the VMs? Will it be compatible, right? And there would be other questions as well. So HCX takes care of all that, right? Irrespective of what version you have on-premise, be it 5.5 or even 5.0, I don't care, right? I am extracting all that complexity away from you and moving those VMs to the service. So what are the common use cases which we normally see? The first use case is obviously data center extension, right? Like I said, you want to test out certain scenarios, right? Now, instead of building out those huge, infrastructure constructs inside your data center, you can utilize them as and when required in this service, right? Or on this VMware service on AWS, right? So that's the number one use case, right? A lot of people actually deploy or have where they utilize virtual desktops. So this is one of the other things, instead of utilizing infrastructure on-premise, you can actually deploy VDIs and client or on this service, right? So that could be another use case. The other thing is disaster recovery. Right? Not many people, or not many organizations are inclined invest heavily on DR, which means typically buying a facility, setting up a data center, or co-locating it in someone else's data center, right? So this gives you a great flexibility, and you can actually create DR on go, right? So wonderful option for you to, if you're setting up a DR, this is a great option for you. Or you want to replace an existing DR. One of the use cases which I heard was one of the customers had his term closing with his existing co-location vendor, right? So it was nearing the term, and they were asking for a lot of money, and they were not ready to increase the money for this co-location vendor. So what they did was, instead of hosting the DR there, they just evacuated the data center and put it in the VMC, right, or this VMware cloud service on AWS, right? So a lot of other things. So some people want 2 DRs, right? So this can complement your existing DR. Migrations, for example, sometimes you are in midst of migrating your data center. You have your existing data centers, which is completely choked up, and you have set up a new data center, right? How do you run your applications in interim, right? VMC is the way to go, or VMware Cloud on AWS is the way to go, right? If you're doing an infrastructure refresh, right? Again, VMware Cloud on AWS can act as an interim service for you when you go for a refresh. The other thing is next generation applications, right? So typically, microservices-based applications, well-factor, based applications, all this new application build-outs, you can very well experiment all that on VMware Cloud on AWS, right? So these are a couple of use cases, and I will, touch base more on such, live use cases which we have seen. Right. So let me, give you an example of Playtika. This is one of the largest global online gaming companies, right? So their challenges were typical. They had reached maximum capacity of their data center, right? And they needed to utilize their existing tools and skills. They were a very big VMware customer, right? And they wanted a minimal downtime, right? When they wanted to, migrate their workloads to public cloud. So VMC or VMware Cloud on AWS was an obvious choice for them, right? So they could do uninterrupted testing, development by live migrating the workloads from on-premise, making space for other workloads, and moving the test and dev environments on cloud, right? So they reduce a lot of complexity as well. Of course, because there is no heavy lifting here, both the environments are same. There is a parity, right? So you just, like I said, demotion from on-premise to the public cloud service, which is AWS, right? The next example is Trend Micro, right? They had this cloud-first model. They wanted to move on cloud, so they have this set deadline where they want to move a lot of workloads to cloud, right? So they also being one of the biggest or one of our big customers for VMware, also decided to go the way because they saw a lot of value in it. Essentially, again, the same things, right? You don't have to refactor the application. There is no migration effort required, right? It's a single-click migration to the cloud, and it's on demand, right? So all the things just fell into the places for them. PHH Mortgage, right? So I told this example earlier on. So they were about to replace their DR solution provider, right? So they were working on a tight deadline. They had to vacate their co-location vendor by a certain time, right? And they were really hard of, options. So when VMC went online or our service went online, things just fell into place for them. It was just an easy migration from their co-location vendor to the service, right? This was entirely, managed by our professional services organization, and some, help was also provided by our partners, right? So they managed to vacate the entire DR, co-located DR to VMC. And then there are many such successes. One of the use cases which I would want to point out to you, right, is something which is more in Indian scenarios, right? I have seen a lot of customers, especially large enterprises which have sufficient development teams, right? They have this requirement of or basically having a VM created for their developers for a short span of time. Typically, a development environment requires about 90 to 180 days of environment, right? So that is one of the biggest use cases, right? So instead of deploying it on-premise, or instead of deploying it on native service, for example, right, which is very hard to come back from, right? So please understand, when you deploy to a native service, which has a very different, machine format, it is going to be extremely hard for you to come back, right? And the environments are also constant, right? Here you are maybe using VMware, then it is going to be a completely different environment, right? So both the environments are dissimilar. On top of that, coming back is also going to be a very, very tough thing, right? So this is one of the use cases which I have seen, a lot of customers buying for, right? The other thing, which we have seen is disaster recovery. Right? So one of the use cases which we recently saw was, all the customers actually didn't have a disaster recovery solution, right? They were planning to set it up, and their existing production gear was actually, up for refresh, or it was very old. So what they did was they just activated that production environment to VMC, or this VMware Cloud on AWS. So they're running their production from VMware Cloud on AWS, whereas the existing production, which was running on an old gear, right, they've made it DR. So such kind of solutions or such kind of use cases also we see a lot. At this point, I just wanted to stop for a moment and wanted to ask Prerna or Ela to put up the next poll question.
Sure, sir. We have our next poll question now, and it's have you integrated your private and public cloud environment, hybrid cloud? Yes or no?
Yeah. So I'll move ahead with the presentation. On the slide, you may be seeing various logos. These are our customers, right? Like I said, this service is almost 1.5 years old, right? It's fairly mature. We've released more than 200 features on this service, right? Every year, I would say we do at least 6 major upgrades to this service, right? And there are a lot of other statistics as well, right? So this is fairly mature, service which is there in market for quite some time now, and as you can see, there are a lot of customers who has bought in for this. So what are the business outcomes, right? Obviously, we all know about Shadow IT, right? And why Shadow IT exists also we know. It is because of accelerating the innovation. Basically, go to market, right? People want to, onboard the applications which touch their revenue or customer satisfaction or process efficiency faster, right? So this actually helps you to do that, right? Be it new application development, or be it application modernization, or be it dynamic capacity need requirements required, or new environment required to onboard an application. This can be procured and deployed in jiffy, right? Respond faster to change, right? We all know mergers and acquisitions are imminent, right? A lot of people undergo it, right? I have seen a lot of banks undergoing it. I've seen challenges which arise out of it, right? For example, I know of a bank which has merged, and they want their products to be available to the bank into which they have merged into, right? So they want their products to be pushed there. So how do they push, right? These are all products which can be pushed via an application. So how do you do that, essentially? That's very, very tough, right? Because IT amalgamation is pretty tough, right? I mean, while marketing has gone ahead and has done branding of both the banks being merged, how do they really go and offer customers the merged portfolio, right? It is pretty tough at the back end, right? Imagine from the IT perspective, how do you really merge the systems, and how do you actually push those products? How do you manage all the other back end processes, right? So that this can be one classic scenarios, right? Data sovereignty, right? Closeness to end user, new capacity, right? So these are changes. This service, incidentally, now is available in almost all the geographies, right? And shortly, you will also see a big announcement for the same here in India as well, right? The other use cases, continuity of operations, right? Many of us, many of the applications are still unprotected, right? So this service can be used to protect those applications. Optimizing costs, right? Cloud has become a mandate now, right? People want to invest into cloud. They're saying, okay, stop any on-premise expansion, right? So if there is an expansion, how can I expand it into cloud? How can I optimize my cost, right? There is essentially a shifting of model from capex to opex. You no longer are buying it, you are paying for the services, right? Which means a change in the model itself. Application portability, like I said, this issue does not exist with this service at all. If you are an existing VMware customer, right, then you don't have this issue at all. So yeah, a lot of you may be asking about, okay, all that is good, but what about the compliances? What about the certifications? Because I require certain SOC compliances, I require certain ISO, certification, I require a HIPAA compliance and stuff like that, right? It's on the screen, right? We have made sure that all that is done and dusted with. How can you buy the service now, right? You can buy it hourly, in an hourly model, on demand, which we call, or you can buy it with 1 year or 3 year subscription, which means that capacity is reserved for you, right? And then you can obviously buy on the add-on service, right? Like I said, the service comes bundled with this. The bare minimum you need to go is for 3 nodes, right? So whatever data capacity is coming, it's bundled. NSX, which gives you, features like micro-segmentation, distributed firewall, is all bundled, right? What are these add-on services? So these add-on services will be things like, for example, SRM, right? So if you want to do disaster recovery as a service, then you need to probably, bundle it with an add-on service of SRM, right? So yeah, and there will be multiple other services as well, which will be, which we can top up on this base service. How we can, basically purchase this. Please remember the third option, credit card, is not valid here in India. It's mostly from the global perspective. Yeah, but you can, what you can do is you can go for SPP credits, which is subscription purchasing program, or hybrid purchasing program, HPP credits. So if you can get in touch with your VMware account manager or the sales guy, he will tell you how to go about it, right? And obviously for the existing VMware customers, right, we do hold or we do value our relationship, right? And if you are an existing VMware customer with certain products, we will give you discounts on the service as well. So the other essential question, right? While this is hosted inside the AWS premises, and both AWS and VMware are working jointly with this, and probably you will also see AWS sales guys coming and talking to you about the service, right? Who owns it? We own it, right? So from essentially the support perspective, VMware owns it completely, right? So it's a single support owner for you. Let me give you some statistics. With this service rolled out for the past 1.5 years, we have 96% support satisfaction with our existing customers. We have introduced a chat-based support, which has a median time of 36 seconds. So if you have a query or if you hit something issue, you open a chat window, right? This is going to get responded, or somebody is going to respond to you in 36 seconds, right? And we sign an SLA of 4 nines with our customers, provided that obviously, if stretch cluster scenario where you have two AZs and you have stretched, your storage in these two AZs. Provided that you have done this, right, this service comes with 4 nines of availability, SLA signed by VMware to you, right? Like I said, completely managed by VMware. We take care of the entire management plane. You don't have to look at anything apart from, just deploying your workloads and monitoring them. That's it, what you will have to do. Like I told you, where all the services are available, obviously Americas went first. They have, lots of data centers which have the service available. India was second, right? You also see India on map, right? So that's going to be announced shortly. Like it says, H1 of 2019. So, shortly you will see this service go live, right? And it's hardly some time away, I can tell you that, right? So the dots essentially here represent where the service has been, already rolled out. What is the partner ecosystem we have with the service? You can see almost everyone is there, right? And if you find something which is missing, just let us know and we'll tie up with that particular vendor, right? What else, right? This is a constantly evolving service. And how do I, make sure that you know about that, right? What we've done is that we've publicly published our roadmap, right? So, we've gone so far to tell you what's going to come in next quarter, what's in preview right now, what's in, development right now. So we give you all these details transparently. So we share it on the website, right? So you're free to go and check it, right? So if a feature is missing, most likely it's going to come sooner or later, right? So that is all. That is what I wanted to cover essentially, and I'm handing it back to Ela now for question and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Devanji, for sharing those thoughtful insights. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Subhajit Kumar, GM Research and Consulting, CMR. Dear delegates, we will take your queries. You can press 0 and 1 in case you have questions on the audio. You can also ask your questions by typing on the chat window. Over to you, Mr. Subhajit.
Thank you, Ela. Hi, I have a question from the participant. The first question is, hello?
Yes.
Yeah. The first question is, how do I connect from on-premise data center to VMC on AWS services? Are there any dependencies?
Yeah. So like I explained earlier, what you require is to set up L2SEC VPN between your data center and the service, right? It can be an L2 or L3 VPN, right? And what you require is also to download the edges, NSX edges on your private data center, which comes obviously bundled with the service. So there is no requirement of having NSX on your private data center. What you require is an edge, and you need to set up this L2 VPC tunnel between your data center and AWS. So that's it. That's all what you require. And yes, one more thing which I failed to mention is that you require an AWS account, right? Which is going to be your own account, which is customer own account. That is not a VMware account. It's a customer own account, so that's also another prereq, right? So that's what you need to have.
Thanks a lot. The second question is from the users is, how does VMware protect customer data on VMC on AWS?
So there are a couple of things which we do to make this service, secure. So this basically service is designed with, multiple layers of protection. This service obviously inherits all the physical and network protections which AWS gives, right? So by default, it inherits all those, protections. On top of it, we add the additional security capabilities which are built into the products like vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. You all know vSAN has got inbuilt encryption, right? NSX offers, a lot of things when it comes to, securing your east-west perimeter, right, as well as north-south perimeter. And vSphere, everyone knows has got the least surface for attacks. So it's a very, very secure code, right? I have not known it been broken even once, right? It's a extremely secure code. So, if you're a VMware customer, the same security parameters which you have configured on premise also apply to this. So there is no difference. On top of it, you also get, AWS protection mechanism, right? So all the data which flows between your data center to this service is also encrypted via the VPN.
Another question from the user is, what are the real use cases for public cloud other than O365?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Other than?
What are the real use cases for public cloud other than O365?
Right. So O365 is a SaaS service, right? It's basically these services which I'm talking about are more of IaaS services, right? So IaaS service, like we discussed, you want to move your development environment or test environments, right? Or you basically want to, so for example, you have an application and that application sees spikes on month end or particular, time frame, then how do you, scale that application? One option is you scale it in-house using some tools, or the other option is you scale it onto the service. So, VMC, you deploy your web and application service on this web and application server, the service, and you scale it there, right? And whenever you're not utilizing, right, those resources go away. So basically, you see the difference. When you do it on-premise, you have to invest in all the infrastructure upfront. When you want to scale it, obviously you use it. But when you're not, actually hitting that peak, those resources are lying idle, right? So if you do the same thing on cloud, you are utilizing it to the maximum, right? Whenever you require it, utilize it. Whenever you don't require it, you just leave it, right? So that's how it works. And like I said, you want to move your test environments, development environments, right? Or you use it as disaster recovery site. But please remember, this is an IaaS service. This is not comparable to O365, which is a SaaS service, right? However, this service can be combined with some of the services from AWS, like for example, RDS, right? So RDS gives you relational database as a service, right? So you can combine it with that.
Another question is cloud still safer to host banking data on it?
Sorry, can you come again?
Is cloud still safer to host banking data on it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, see this. So, what is the concern for any banking, banking consumer, right? Basically, they are all guided by the RBI mandates, right? You need to have data sovereignty, right? Which means the data can't leave Indian premises or basically, India boundaries and stuff like that, right? So while this service today is not available in India, like I said, the service is shortly going to be announced in India, right? So once it's here in India, right, you solve the data sovereignty issues. Now, as far as the other aspects goes, that is, the security around how do I protect my data, how do I ensure that the data is encrypted when it is flowing between my data center to the service, all that has been taken care of. Like I answered earlier, right? We encrypt all the data which moves from your private cloud to this public cloud service. We ensure that the data at rest in this public cloud service is encrypted. It inherits all the fundamental protection mechanisms which AWS infrastructure brings in. Right, you have NSX to secure your east-west traffic as well as north-south traffic. You can do micro-segmentation. You can do distributed firewalling. Right, so it is as good as your private data center. Right, so it's extremely secure.
Okay. The last question is from a user is asking if we have two different VM clusters in two different data centers, can he migrate his existing running VM guest on RHEL from one VM cluster to second VM cluster without any downtime using VMware HCX?
So, okay, I get your question, but there are a couple of questions in written. But anyways, I'm assuming certain things and answering it to you. So you have, what essentially you're saying, you've got two clusters. Now, the important point is whether these two clusters are in same premises or they are existing in two disparate locations. So that's the moot point, right? So if they are in the same premises, why would you do HCX, right? You just move a VM by doing a cross vCenter vMotion, if that's your question, right? So that's a capability which has come from VMware vSphere 6.5 onwards. You can do a cross vCenter vMotion. Right. Now, if your question is regarding these clusters which are there in two different data centers, disparate location, then yes, you can utilize HCX to do it, right? Whereas HCX, please remember the HCX service comes bundled with VMC, which is VMware Cloud on AWS service. Otherwise, if you wish to use this service for some other purpose, you need to buy separate licenses. But for VMware Cloud on AWS, this comes bundled.
All that, that's all from my end. Over to you, Ila.
Thank you so much, Subhajit. So participants, on behalf of VMware, Reliance Capital and CMR, I would like to thank all the participants for joining this webinar. We hope it has been a useful time spent with us. Your feedback is very important. Please submit your feedback at the end of the webinar. You all may disconnect the lines now and have a great evening ahead.